With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning on the AgNet News Hour. Coming up later, ag innovators have an opportunity to win $1 million. We'll have more on that. But our top story today, alleged overreach by the Environmental Protection Agency when it comes to vehicle emission standards, have led to a lawsuit. Chad Smith has more on the legal pushback.
The American Farm Bureau Federation and the National Corn Growers Association joined the American Petroleum Institute in suing the EPA over its emission standards for light and medium-duty vehicles for model years 2027 through 2032. Travis Cushman, Deputy General Counsel for AFBF, explains the issues with the rule.
What this rule would do is by 2032, 68% of all cars and light trucks will need to be electric, and 43% of large pickups and vans would have to be electric. We're arguing that EPA here, they're not regulating air emissions. They are requiring the country to change how they propel their vehicles. And in doing so, they've gone well beyond the scope of the regulatory authority Congress granted them.
Cushman says this rule would place a large burden on farmers and ranchers.
This rule is aiming to artificially and significantly decrease the supply of internal combustion engines in favor of electric vehicles, which thereby forces consumers off of sustainable biofuels, and in a much more expensive electric vehicles, rural America lacks proper charging infrastructure. As a result, farmers will steadily lose access to a large market for biofuels, and farm vehicles will become significantly more expensive to purchase.
He talks about what's next in the legal process.
So we will start briefing the issue. After we brief the issue, the court will hold an oral argument, and then later on, they'll issue a decision. Representing us is Paul Clement, the former Solicitor General, so he's a very exciting attorney to work with.
To keep up with the developments, go to fb.org. Chad Smith, Washington.
USDA's new Assisting Specialty Crop Exports Initiative, or ACE, is now accepting program funding applications for efforts to address specific export challenges. Rod Bain reports.
Project funding applications are now being accepted for areas within USDA's new Assisting Specialty Crop Exports Initiative.
The ACE program overall will prioritize and target $100 million. This first tranche is for $20 million in ACE projects to really address some cross-cutting issues that were raised by a diverse segment of our specialty crop producers across the United States when we first started talking about how could we better support them in the export space.
That's Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Affairs, Alexis Taylor. She says the funding addresses challenges within the specialty crop export industry, such as maximum residue limits of pesticides and fungicides in fruits, vegetables, and nuts sold to foreign markets.
That's a big area that we see challenges for our specialty crop exports. So we announced this first $20 million in funding is going to be targeted to 5 projects.
The application period for the MLR Quick Marketing Sheets focus area has already passed. However, the remaining projects have a mid to late July application deadline. The breakdown of these focus areas include
MRL regional harmonization. So we are looking for folks to support work in Asia, Latin America, and Africa related to MRLs for specialty crops in those regions to really help develop risk-based and trade facilitative policies that really line up with international standards like Codex. We'll be targeting MRL guideline implementation in the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation economies to help facilitate adoption and implementation of official APEC MRL guidelines that help facilitate trade and again are consistent with international science-based standards like Codex.
The remaining projects for application involves partnerships to
do research and help do some data generation so we could go to Codex and get MRLs that are supportive of facilitating trade for specialty crops. And then the project, which is not tied to MRLs, will target Sustainable Packaging Innovation Lab. And we're looking for a partner to create this lab.
Details about the Assisting Specialty Crop Export Program are available online at www.fas.usda.gov/programs. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Don't forget, if you've missed any of our morning shows or if you simply need to catch the news at a different time, you can subscribe to our podcast and have statewide agriculture news at your convenience. All you have to do is search for the AgNet News Hour on your favorite podcast downloading app. You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. With today's National Spotlight, here's Chuck Zimmerman.
I'm visiting with Jim Wilson with Ag Gateway. And first of all, Jim, what do you do for the organization?
So I'm the Chief Technology Officer, and I oversee the kind of publication and maintenance of all of our resources that we publish. My counterpart, Ben Craker, oversees the actual working groups that do it, but then once they're done with their work, they hand it over to the group I run, and we make sure that it gets published in a consistent manner for the world to use.
Well, you've been busy because we have an announcement just this week about the ADAPT project, which is now published, the ADAPT 1.0. Tell us what that means.
Yeah, well, let me just correct the terminology. So it's actually ADAPT Standard 1.0. So ADAPT would be kind of this set of resources that includes the wildly successful ADAPT framework, which has been out since about 2014 and been refined over the years. But that's all built on the Microsoft technology stack, and there have been a number of companies who've said, great work, love that you made this open source, but we need something that's not tied to the Microsoft tech stack, and we would like a proper standard. And so over the last couple of years, Ag Gateway experts have been working hard to produce a standard for field operations sorts of data.
Now, that's just out here this week, been announced. What does that mean for Ag Gateway to accomplish that?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, it's a big milestone for us, but it really sets us up for continued development. I mean, even here at the Ag Gateway mid-year meeting at Prairie Meadows in Altoona, Iowa, we're already discussing what are the next steps, what is the right place for it, what do we do with observations and measurements, how do we express irrigation data, where does soil testing data go. We have an incredible set of tools, processes, production methods, ways to give developers the resources they need to get the job done in ways that make them most productive.
So I know those would be for discussions maybe starting in the annual meeting later this year, who knows. But how about on the side of your members or farmers for that matter, how much does it mean to them to be able to have this kind of standard?
Yeah, well, let's start with farmers. I think from a farmer perspective, they're going to be kind of the secondary beneficiaries in the sense that, farmers just want their stuff to work. When they make phone calls, they don't really want to know the details about the 5G standard underlying a successful phone call or data transfer over mobile. With respect to our members, I think probably the biggest benefit to many of them will be the fact that during the process of producing ADAPT Standard version 1, we took some of the lessons learned from our ADAPT framework development. We were able to clean up some kind of messy architectural aspects of it. We were able to clean out some dead wood. We were able to really sharpen our definitions, improve our processes for producing good, solid documentation that developers can use. So I think it's just this, what we have produced and our ability to quickly duplicate this effort to give developers and others exactly what they need to get the job done.
I think, as you said, there's more to come, and we don't know just when that will be, but that's a big step.
Yeah, it is a big step, Chuck. I tell you, I've been doing standards for over 20 years, and all sorts of methods, approaches, have come and gone and been dreamed about over the years. And finally, so many things have come together in the last few years, and Ag Gateway is kind of on the leading edge of just using the best of the technologies and best practices to quickly give the industry what it needs from a standards perspective.
Well, you've got a great committee. You've got and these are the members too. So you've got some of the best of all of your members.
Yeah, I love it. It is so refreshing to go into meetings and we see experts from various companies disagreeing rather forcefully on a number of things, but still respecting one another, knowing that we have a mechanism to take these verbal expressions of disagreement, put them in writing, hash through them, and in good faith come out the other side with, the best compromise or the best selected solution for the industry. It's a lot of fun.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to what the future holds. And thank you very much, Jim, for giving us an update about this announcement that was just made. Here at the Ag Gateway Mid-Year Meeting, I'm Chuck Zimmerman.
This segment is brought to you by Live Earth Products. To get to know a little more about Live Earth Products, we're talking on the phone today with Vice President Russell Taylor. For the Conservationist of the Year, what goals would you like to see occur this year?
So this is continuing work as the Certified Crop Advisor Conservationist of the Year. They're looking for certified crop advisors who are trying to aid farmers in getting information or conservation practices. One thing we've identified that is keeping farmers from getting conservation practices is actually just information and products. The current federal regulations actually were written in the 1950s. And at that time, those rules were only restricting fertilizers and pesticides. They didn't put into account other developing technologies such as plant biostimulants and some of these newer technologies we're using in agriculture. And so for 2024, our goal is to really help change the laws that are impacting biostimulant regulation to allow them to be used and treated as a fertilizer, not as a pesticide.
So what does that process look like to go through that and get that change to be where it needs to be?
Well, actually, there's a very long on-ramp. We've been working on this since 2014, and the bricks that we've laid on this path are now hopefully being included in the Farm Bill. So more than anything now, it's just supporting the work we've already done, trying to get legislators aware of the problem and hopefully enact those rules. There's an act right now by California regulators that's called the Plant Biostimulant Act. And so the best thing that farmers can do is call up and say, hey, we support this language. This is going to give us more tools to enact those conservation practices and have more products available to us.
To get to know more about Live Earth Products, you can visit them online at liveearth.com. That is spelled LIVEARTH.com. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. Don't forget, if you've missed any of our morning shows or if you simply need to catch the news at a different time, you can subscribe to our podcast and have statewide agriculture news at your convenience. All you have to do is search for the AgNet News Hour on your favorite podcast downloading app. We will be back in just a moment with more agriculture news. Coming up in a few moments, we'll have today's This Land of Ours report, but first, more of the day's agriculture news. And with today's AgNet West headlines, here's Brian German.
The deadline to have a workplace violence prevention plan in place is coming up soon. President and CEO of AgSafe, Teresa Keene, explained some of the complexities of the regulation.
So this is effective July 1 of this year, and it applies to all businesses in California. So if you are a retailer or if you're an ag operation, it applies to all of us. And so we are now required to create a workplace violence prevention plan. What's interesting about this, Brian, too, is it needs to be specific to address the hazards of each work site. We've got some ag operations that are diversified, right? And so some of them have retail shops, and then we've got where they've got folks out in the field. And so you need to think about all the specific hazards to each of those locations and address those. And so you need to create a plan that's specific for each one. So in that plan, you need to talk about how you prohibit worker retaliation, how to respond and report an act of workplace violence. You need to provide training that addresses those hazards. You need to create a hazard assessment, and then keeping records, so maintaining a violent incident log as well. So there's a lot that goes into this plan, and we're all still figuring this out. There's a lot of gray areas, and we're not exactly sure how everything is going to be enforced yet, but I want to make sure that employers are ready. On the Cal OSHA website, there is a template for putting together a plan. It's always a good idea if Cal OSHA provides a template plan. Go ahead and use that, but make sure that you put in your information in each of those areas And then you got to make sure that you review it with your supervisors, your employees, making sure that everybody understands and it's also translated into the language that your workforce understands. So that is always a good idea and a place to start. There are also some FAQs on the website and some fact sheets specific for agricultural operations. There's one for agricultural employers, but also one for employees. So when you're doing your training, to be able to provide them with some additional information and something that Cal OSHA recognizes.
Pivot Bio announced that its customers have reduced over 932,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent since early 2022 by using the company's microbial nitrogen products. The reduction is equivalent to the annual emissions of 2.5 gas-fired power plants. The company's latest impact report highlights that in 2023 alone, users of Pivot Bio products avoided over 700,000 metric tons of emissions, a significant reduction compared to the world's leading air capture facility. The report also details the Innovator program, which connects growers with companies to reduce Scope 3 emissions. In 2023, this program matched nearly 400,000 acres with partners, resulting in a reduction of almost 140,000 metric tons of Scope 3 emissions. The program has also provided financial incentives to growers. The deadline's approaching to sign up for the Grassland Conservation Reserve Program from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Agricultural producers and private landowners can sign up for the program until June 28th. Managed by the USDA's Farm Service Agency, Grassland CRP encourages the conservation of grasslands while allowing for continued grazing and haying practices by offering annual rental payments and cost-share assistance. Grassland CRP supports wildlife, soil health, and carbon sequestration. Interest in the program has been high, with over 6.8 million acres conserved in the past 3 years and 2.3 million acres enrolled in 2023 alone. Landowners interested in the program should contact their local USDA Service Center before the June 28th deadline. Continuous CRP enrollment is also available with automatic acceptance for eligible participants. The California Department of Food and Agriculture is inviting proposals for new conservation practices to be included in its Healthy Soils program. As part of the California Healthy Soils Initiative, the HSP funds projects that improve soil health, sequester carbon, and reduce greenhouse gases. Since its start in 2016, the program has expanded to include various practices such as whole orchard recycling added in 2020. To be eligible for HSP funding, practices must reduce greenhouse gases and have established implementation standards. CDFA's Office of Environmental Funding and Innovation will need to receive proposals by August 2nd. Proposals will be evaluated by academic and agency experts, with final selections coordinated with the California Air Resources Board and USDA's NRCS. Details on proposal requirements and submissions can be found on the HSP website. The AgTech event, FIRA USA, is coming to the Yolo County Fairgrounds October 22nd through the 24th. Senior Vice President of Innovation at Western Growers, Walt Duflock, highlighted a new feature for this year's event.
We heard loud and clear from growers, I'm busy, I can't come for 3 days. I don't like paying a registration fee for these guys that I can talk to on my ranch anytime. All fair points. So we listened, we made the change. And as I announced on stage last year in Salinas, and I'm happy to repeat it anytime I'm asked, growers get to come for free. So if you can come for a half day, great. You can come for a full day, great. You can come for more than a day, great. Just come. It's free to get in. We'll welcome you in. You're the show at FIRA, and everyone knows that. The startups know that. The manufacturers know that. Western Growers certainly knows that, and so does UCA&R and GoFar. So if you can make it to any part of the show, come see the robots, come see the talks. We would encourage you to do so, and we're working with our partners on the manufacturing and the dealer side to get them to get their grower partners there. The growers are the straw that stirs the drink at FIRA. We know that. Only makes sense to let them in for free, and effective this year and going forward, that's what's going to happen. Any grower gets in for free. And we put the new website up, so FIRA-USA.com. And on that site, you can register, you can learn about the event, you can see what's going on for content.
I'm Brian German for AgNet West Radio Network.
Orange production is up in a state known for the fruit. That's coming up on This Land of Ours.
A slight adjustment up in all U.S. orange production forecasts for June. Mark Hudson of USDA's National Agricultural Statistics Service says a less than 1% increase in orange production is reflected in a similar forecast for the only state reporting this month, Florida.
An all orange for this month for Florida was 17,860,000 boxes, which is actually up 60,000 boxes from last month.
Breaking down Florida orange production by Valencia and non-Valencia varieties.
For non-Valencias, it went from 6.8 million boxes down to 6.76 million boxes. In other words, it's down 40,000 boxes or 1% from last month. And for our Valencias is 11.1 million boxes compared to last month's 11 million even boxes. So that's actually up 1%.
I'm Rod Bain reporting.
You're listening to the AgNet News Hour. Climate change is having an effect on a lot of things, including sea life. I talked with Dr. Damian Brady about how one creature in particular is affected.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dr. Damian Brady. I'm a professor in the School of Marine Sciences and director of the Darling Marine Center here at the University of Maine.
So we wanted to talk about climate change and lobsters, which I find to be very interesting. But let's just start out by explaining how climate change is affecting lobsters.
Yeah, so I like to think, or I like to explain that lobsters are like Goldilocks, right? They want the temperature not too cold and not too warm. That too warm is roughly like 68 degrees Fahrenheit. So, climate can affect lobsters by, directly, changing the temperature. And the closer they make it to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, the worse off that lobster will be. And lobster react by maybe moving offshore or moving north into the east into, more Canadian waters or further sort of down what we call down east in the Gulf of Maine. So that's kind of the primary impact of climate, I think, is really like changing the habitat, changing where they can be.
So with these changes, as we learned, in grade school or high school, when one thing in our ecosystem changes, it has a domino effect. So what else could this make happen?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So the lobster fishery is enormously important here in Maine, right? It is 3 years ago, it was worth $725 million. It's the single largest fishery in North America in terms of value. If you add Canada, Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts. So it's enormously important. It's hard to understate, right? And then it's also part of the culture here in Maine, right? Like tourism is the number one economic driver here in Maine, and a lot of those tourists are coming to the coast of Maine for lobster, right? So if lobster become more difficult to catch or less abundant in southern Maine, let's say, right, which is, potentially possible, then you change kind of the culture of this place, right? And I think you change the economic profiles. We have 5,000 to 6,000 license holders here in the state of Maine. And so it's the carry-on effect on the tourism and coastal communities that, if climate affects this one resource like lobster, it has the potential to affect all the communities here along the coast in New England.
So where do you think that the lobster are moving to?
Yeah, so, in years gone by, roughly 40% of lobsters would be in Maine, maybe, or, rather the Gulf of Maine, 45%, and then, 60 or 55% of the catch would be in Canada. I'd say, last year was roughly 70-30, right? So lobsters are certainly the center of their abundance is definitely shifting north and to the east. And that's not to say the sky is falling. Maine is not, most of Maine is not close to the 68 degrees Fahrenheit. So I think the fishery in Maine will be robust for a long, long time. But as we know, there used to be substantial lobster fisheries in Long Island Sound and Rhode Island, and those fisheries are much diminished, since then. So I think those are our big questions, right? Is 30% of a big number is still a pretty big number and is going to maintain the Maine fishery for a while, but it's undeniable that there are more lobsters in Canada now than ever before.
Yeah. So what about those of us who are completely on the other side of the nation in California, where the majority of my listeners are for this program? And, obviously we don't travel much to Maine, but we do enjoy eating lobster. So what could that mean for us?
First, you should come to Maine. So I'll start there. And then, second of all, roughly in the last 10 or 15 years, lobster has sort of become a globalized product. I think before tariffs, 2 out of every 5 Maine lobsters, for instance, ended up in China. So it used to be that most of the lobsters got sold into a live market here in Maine. Now it's a much more globalized product in the last 10 or 15 years. I think for folks in California, right, lobsters, because the Gulf of Maine has over a 10-year period warmed faster than most places on the planet, it's a little bit of a canary in the coal mine, right? What is going to happen to fisheries that exist in these places that warm rapidly? And so before 2010, roughly or so, the Gulf of Maine was a colder place. Most of its water was sourced from the Arctic. After 2010, after some climate-related changes and shifts in oceanography, now a lot of our water comes from the south, from the Gulf Stream, right? And so the Gulf of Maine is kind of like a crystal ball or a canary in the coal mine for other fisheries that may be located in areas that are warming quickly.
And so, why is the Gulf of Maine warming faster than everywhere else, it seems?
Yeah, so I mean, just off the coast of Maine, we have this, feature that many of us are familiar with called the Gulf Stream, right? It's this super warm water that's coming out of the Gulf of Mexico and along the East Coast. And as it does, it interacts with that Arctic water. So Maine is, and where I am sort of sitting right here in the Gulf of Maine is kind of the northern edge of this really cold water. And so it's susceptible to what we call replacement, right? That water that used to come from the Labrador is now coming from the Gulf Stream, given the strength of the Gulf Stream over time. And I like to think of it as a kiddie pool, and it's almost like the Gulf Stream has pinched off the water that used to come from the Arctic at a place called the tail of the Grand Bank. So that water that used to come in there is essentially getting pinched off by a Gulf Stream that's sort of moving north and getting stronger.
All right. Now, before we wrap up, I will tell you that Maine is on my bucket list to visit.
Yes. All right, good.
The furthest east I've been is Massachusetts, so I will get there. But as we do wrap up, any final thoughts for our listeners today?
Yeah, I mean, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that, with climate change and with the fact that water is becoming warmer, other than this lobster sort of moving up to Canada, they move into deeper water, right? And I think that has put the Gulf of Maine and put lobsters and this important fishery to the culture and tradition and economy here of Maine on a collision course with endangered species. For instance, whales that exist in those deeper waters, right? So I think that's our other big climate concern is what is going to be this collision course between this extremely important iconic fishery and these extremely important endangered species like North Atlantic right whale.
This is the AgNet News Hour. We will be back in just a moment with more agriculture news. Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. The Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research is now accepting Harvest for Health Breakthrough Crop Challenge applications with $1 million award. To get more information, I talked with Senior Program Director Dr. Constance Gewa. All right. Well, I was really interested when I got this email about the Harvest for Health Breakthrough Crop Challenge. So before we start talking about all of this, let's talk about what is a breakthrough crop. And then, what is this challenge for?
Thank you. So we are referring to this as a breakthrough crop in that the program Harvest for Health is focusing on underutilized crops. So these are the crops that we don't see much of them within our regular, food system. So think about, I like using the analogy of your table. If you think about your table, you tend to see crops like corn and other parts of the world referred to as maize. You'll see things like wheat, rice, potatoes. So there are these commonly consumed crops that we see often within the food system, at our tables, in the markets, right? And then there are those crops that do exist, but we don't see much of them within the market, within the system, or even at our tables. And an example, there are multiple of them, but a good example could be even something that we're familiar with, like millets, okay? Millets are crops that do exist. They're being produced in various parts around the world, including some in the US, but we don't commonly see them within the market, within the system, in different parts of the system at our tables. And there are a number of them. There are, even if you look at the grains, you will find some commonly consumed grains and underutilized grains. If you look at vegetables, the same. So within each of these groups of crops, you will find those underutilized crops. And so the breakthrough is really, the program is to help find a way in which these crops can make it through, break through, and be seen more regularly, be used more regularly within our food system.
And there seems to be a very good way that some attention is being brought on this, and that is with this challenge. There's a really big cash prize here of $1 million for the applicant with the winning predictive model. So can you tell me a little bit about what they're looking for?
So with the Harvest for Health, and I want to maybe go back to really the beginnings and what we are looking for and how we came to that. The way FAR works, the foundation works, is we bring people together and we collaborate and get people into convening spaces where we get ideas, find out what are the challenges, what are the issues, and how can they be resolved within the food system, within U.S. food and agriculture. And if you look at, again, with the focus on just 3 or 4 crops that we are seeing a food system that is quite vulnerable. But we know if we can diversify this food system with more crops being part of it, we are building something that is more resilient, a food system that is more resilient. But also we're improving and increasing biodiversity. In terms of human health, we're increasing dietary diversity. So there are benefits to it. But how do you get this started, especially for crops that we know it does require effort and money to really get a crop from that stage where it's not well known to a place where it is featuring prominently? It takes time, it takes effort, it takes money. But we sat down with various stakeholders, researchers, industry, and FAO works very well with various stakeholders. We know we have the experience of bringing them into these spaces where they can get into a discussion and find out what are the things that are of value to you within the industry that you'd be willing to invest in if you're thinking about the underutilized crops. What can be your role in getting these crops feature more and more within the food system and in your work? And through those discussions, they were able to identify that there are certain properties that are of interest to the industry and to other organizations and various populations. So there are functional properties that we're interested in. They're keen on thickeners and emulsifiers and stabilizers. They want to see more of that. They're keen on identifying other bulking agents, taste and flavor enhancers, and of course, the high nutrient density crops as well. So those are the 4 properties that really came to the top. And so with this particular phase of the challenge, we are reaching out and saying, here's an opportunity for research teams to come together and develop a predictive model, a model that if you use it, using data, can actually identify crops or underutilized crops that have the potential to have these properties, these 4 properties of interest. This is what this is all about, is can somebody or can a team or a group develop a model that can be used to identify the underutilized crops that have the potential to serve in these 4 different purposes? And the winning team, the winning model will get the $1 million prize.
We are talking about the Harvest for Health Breakthrough Crop Challenge. So this is really interesting. And like you said, there are so many benefits to expanding the crops that are used worldwide. And you mentioned, as you mentioned, several. One of them, beyond feeding people, which of course is number one and extremely important, but also rotating out crops and growing different crops. As we know, when we're growing the same crop over and over, it takes different minerals and such from the soils. And so rotating out and using a different crop can also help replenish soils as well. So it's kind of a mutually beneficial idea, if I'm understanding this right, to be looking at some of these underutilized crops to feed the world.
Yes. It's beneficial not only to humans, it's beneficial for the soil, it's beneficial for agriculture in general. When we have more biodiversity, that actually is helpful to the soil and to the crop system in general.
Yeah. So how long has the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research been a part of this or been doing this?
With the Harvest for Health itself or the foundation as a whole?
For the Harvest for Health.
So the Harvest for Health is an idea that they started, and this started prior to 2023. So I do believe it started in 2022 before I joined the foundation. That's when the first meetings were held. And we've gone through, this is our phase one. And when we started with this phase one, apart from the meetings and figuring out how do we support researchers in getting ready for this, actually we provided seed awards. We had a call for seed awards. And that is because as we were having these discussions, those early phases of our program development, we learned that even when you think about developing a predictive model, not all researchers have the same resources. And some may be more advanced in this area of computational technology and what is needed for this to happen. Others may not be. And so at that point, a decision was made to provide seed awards to those who need that small amount of money to help them get ready. And so in early 2023, we provided seed awards to 3 organizations. And those organizations who received seed awards are required to participate and submit a model by August 7th, which is our closing date for this call. And in addition to those who received seed awards, it's also open. This opportunity is open to anybody. Anybody who meets the criteria for the call, it doesn't matter where they are in the world, it's a global call, can actually submit their model by the due date, which is August 7th, 2024. So we've gone through since early 2022 when the discussion started, and now we're in 2024.
Yeah, so it's taken quite a bit of work, and you've gotten some good partnerships and the funding and everything for it. And now you get to actually put everything through and see what we come up with. I say I will have no part in this. I'm not innovative enough. But yes, so it's exciting. So for our listeners, where can they go online and get more information?
So going online, you can go to the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research. That is our online page, and I will spell out the actual address. I want to make sure I get that right. It is www.foundationfar. So let me spell that out for everybody. So it is www.foundationfar.org. And if you go to our page under opportunities and grants, that's where you will actually find this under grant funding. You'll find the open opportunities there, and click on that link under grants and funding, and you'll find the information and the details for this call.
Any other thoughts that you want to leave for our listeners before we go?
Thank you so much, Sabrina. What I'd like to say again, just encourage, teams that are out there to support this effort. Increasing the use of underutilized crops within the food system is something that is beneficial to everybody, and it's beneficial also to planet Earth generally. It's a good thing for all. So if there's any way you can support the work by submitting to this call, that is great. If there's anything you can do within your own community to see that more and more of these underutilized crops are getting into the system, are being used more and more, that is your contribution. But I'd encourage you to go to our page and learn some more about the opportunity and continue to support us at FAR.
Thank you so much for your time, Constance. I really appreciate it. That web address again is foundationfar.org. That's today's top agriculture news. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. Thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West online at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can also find our broadcast team of Brian German and Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.